Hi, and welcome to Breaking, Building, and Belonging. This is a memoir driven podcast, and this next episode is called Triplets, Typewriters, and Turnarounds. Um, our last episode was Players, Partners, and Possibilities, and I also threw in a bonus episode, Meet the Author. So go back, watch that one, and you can learn a little bit more about what this memoir is all about, what this channel is all about, and how I'm looking to connect with you and start a community here out on YouTube. So for now, I hope you enjoy this next episode. I'm going to go off camera, let you listen if you want to, read the captions, whatever you'd appreciate. But I hope you enjoy this next chapter. Thanks. I want to see you soar. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Maya Angelou. When I was a kid, I'd get very excited when I heard the words, "Once upon a time, three little girls went to the police academy." It took me a few years to understand exactly why I was so excited, but at first, it was simply because a really cool TV show was coming on that was action packed and like nothing I'd ever seen. Of course, only a few of you are going to remember the following line, and they were each assigned a very hazardous duty. The disembodied voice character, who we never see throughout the life of the series, who talks in that opening, well, his name's Charlie. He's the angel's mysterious, wealthy benefactor and boss. And in the opening segment, Charlie somewhat sarcastically describes how these three lovely and more than capable young ladies were playing primarily administrative, low level police and detective work, duties far below their true capabilities and talents, before he, and I quote, took them away from all that. Well, the premise of the TV show was that some rich, supposedly handsome, we never see his face, uh, international man of mystery plucked three rookie police officers away from directing traffic and meter mating to a life of international intrigue and top tier glamorous detective work. The punchline of the premise is that Charlie saw infinite potential in them and wanted to see them achieve great things. Well, I was no Charlie as a kid, and I'm certainly no Charlie as an adult. I've always been much more of a Bosley. Bosley was the much less handsome, often goofy comedic foil slash older brother uncle figure, and he played the liaison between the mysterious, attractive, and powerful Charlie and the angels. However, like Charlie, I always wanted to take my sisters away from all that. Now, lest I paint myself as some saintly big brother figure, I need to confess that I was often mean to my sisters when we were kids. We took out many of our frustrations from our intense life on one another. My mother, in one of her wiser parenting moves, made a rule. I was often left in charge of my sisters, but I was never allowed to be physically violent with them. "Don't hit them, I'll kill you," or something to that effect. So I used words. My sister DJ, she fantasized about being a Hollywood starlet. Her features were more like mine from my dad's side. She had long brown hair, brown eyes, and olive skin, but set on a much less Sicilian, much more Northern European face. She was a beauty. So naturally, I called her ugly. Josephine and Angelina, they favored the Italian side. And people quickly learned that they were more like twins than two of three triplets. They inherited their beauty from my mom's side more than my dad's, but carried more weight than the rail thin DJ. So I picked on them for that. "Wazumo," I would taunt them when they got on my nerves. Holding my arms out, I mimicked holding a large belly. I was as cruel as any of my bus stop bullies. Now, they were no pushovers by any stretch of the imagination. They knew my mom's rule and that I would follow it. So they would pounce on me like a pack of lionesses with razor sharp claws, digging into my skin. Their typical target was my arms, and I had scratches upon scars on each limb as a penance for my big fat mouth. And when I wasn't being ugly towards my sisters, I did play the protective big brother role. The all that I wanted to take them away from was not tedious police work, but our life of struggle. Now, we'd often fight over food. There were battles over who got the last pork chop. And it was more like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome than pass me the potatoes, please. We were like ravenous wolves when we had food, and we'd often whine and pine for it when we didn't. As a result, we all still eat much too fast. And we each had to acquire our table manners much later in life when our spouses, partners, or adults would call us out on our Lord of the Flies like attack on our dinner plates. Ours was a childhood full of growling bellies and anxious moments in near empty houses and apartments. Sometimes we'd have cable TV, even though it was typical for whatever TV we had to be broken. We could often watch just the three channels, quote unquote, an old school reference to the big three on air networks that could sometimes somewhat get over your TV antenna, meaning the picture was often grainy or wavy in those analog days, but it was better than nothing because we were bored. We would wait for food, we'd wait for our mom to arrive, and we'd each seek freedom from the fear of the next angry outburst or drama that was sure to unfold. My friends at the marina at that one house, and my sisters found friends across the street at that same one. But many times we'd find ourselves stranded in some new neighborhood with only each other as companions. Well, all this made us war buddies. However, unlike the best war buddies from the World War II movies I watched with Peepop on Sundays, I left my platoon behind and I went AWOL. Instead of being the one who took them away from all that, like Charlie, I escaped more often and earlier than my sisters did. As a teenager, I took trips to New York, finding brief refuge in a different world. At 16, I left home entirely, got a job, and moved into the relative security of Graham and Peepop's apartment. My sisters, well, they had no such means of escape, or at least they didn't see a viable one. They had chances to visit New York or move in with relatives, but they stayed, whether out of fear, obligation, or simply not believing escape was an option. I told myself I'd find a way to help them, that I'd come back. But the truth is, I left them to fight battles I barely understood. I can still hear Stunad's taunts of coward as I sought safety while they remained in jeopardy. I'll share one of the worst of those moments a little later. There were times when my mother was genuinely unable to care for them and keep them safe. So both DJ and Josephine, they had forays into living a different life. DJ once went to Long Island to try living with my Uncle Nate and his family. She could not acclimate to the new environment or overcome the homesickness, so she begged to return. Josephine moved in with one of my aunts and did not remain away long, returning to be part of the trio of angels shortly after a failed attempt to break free. Well, Angelina, she never even had a moment of respite. In fact, she suffered some of the worst moments of our collective childhood. She lived in a car for a short time with my mom and out of a few sketchy hotel rooms. And this is the oversimplified and sanitized version of that story, the whole of which is not mine to tell. All of my sisters endured more extended periods of parental abandonment than I did. For a time, when my sisters were still preteens, my mother had a boyfriend who lived on the other side of town, and they were left in an apartment on their own, night after night. It was rumored the boyfriend was on drugs, so I suppose I'm grateful he did not move in with them. They tell tales of many occasions when they had a pizza box left for them, with a few slices of pizza and a note to keep them company, instead of a parent or brother to ensure their safety. Eventually, they each took turns leaving the house. Unlike the safe harbor found with my grandparents that I had, they each had found boyfriends and moved from one mess to another. DJ found a guy, became pregnant at 17, moved in with Grandma and Peepop. This was after I left the house, to usher in her beautiful twin girls. Josephine found a boyfriend who was very kind and childlike, as well as a chronic alcoholic. Angelina also lived with Graham and Peepop at various times, and she managed to find a boyfriend who appeared kind, meek, and mild on the outside and in public, but one who we later learned would hit her when they were alone. Each eventually moved out on their own. DJ resided in one of the town's more notorious government subsidized housing complexes and raised her girls there. She went back to school and became a nurse. DJ relied on the kindness of a couple of older women friends who were surrogate moms that helped her care for her kids while she was going to school. She broke free of the cycle of poverty. In time, she met a more decent man, a hardworking entrepreneur with a tree cutting business, and they settled down and had another child later in life. They're now divorced, and my sister is a single mom and grandma in her middle years. She became a nurse, became certified as a nurse case manager, and made a good living. But the scars from a childhood of pining for a mother to show her attention and affection, well, they run deep, and she finds herself constantly fighting the demons of the past, even as she finds joy in her grandchildren. Josephine, she lived with her alcoholic boyfriend for many years until one day she left. She later found another boyfriend with whom she married and had a child. She and he set up a residence in the next town from where we grew up. They still live there. Josephine worked at Pizza Hut for many years, but eventually went to work as a medical receptionist, and now has become a medical billing expert. Their house is the central gathering place for occasions, both grand and mundane. Her husband takes great care to ensure an above ground pool resides out back for the remaining family to congregate on a hot Florida days. They also have a large sofa for everyone to sit on during birthday and Christmas gatherings. Now, Angelina, she left the abusive boyfriend in time and she found a new boyfriend. She married him, but it turned out that she also found someone who was more addicted to substances than to caring for his family. Eventually, they divorced, but not without first having a lovely daughter. My sister Angelina has been a restaurant worker, server, and hostess since she was a teenager. In recent years, she too found a boyfriend who treats her as one should. And like my brother in law, he endeavors to make her life as much of a take her away from all that as he can. She's become so good at saving and managing her money that she was able to buy a house on a server's salary. She had her daughter and grandsons move in. They live in the same town we grew up in. My sisters are amazingly resilient women. They each have endured hardships that are beyond the scope of this book. I'm giving you the Cliff's Notes version, not because I don't want to share just how deeply formidable they each are, but because their stories are not my stories to tell at that level of detail. The message I hope you take away is that they persisted. They moved through each trial and continue to love one another and me through all the hurdles life offers. So, one of the things I cherish the most is their humor armor. It's always on. They've learned to laugh and make light of circumstances that most people would crumble beneath. When we get together, it inevitably leads to riotous laughter and recounting of one story or another. So, in my mind, the angels finally were taken away from all that, not by some mysterious Charlie or even the brother they ought to have been able to rely upon as their hero, but by their own grit. They certainly do not live lives that our upbringing might have predicted. They have all shaken the bonds of abject poverty. None of them physically abused their children as they grew into prosperous adults. Among their kids, they have two with master's degrees, one earning one, and one with a bachelor's medical certificate. My sisters are transitional characters. They refuse to perpetuate the harmful behaviors they experienced and instead chose a different path. They metabolized the poison of their upbringing and prevented much of it from flowing downstream to future generations. I have no illusions that my sisters fully metabolized the poison, but they've done everything in their power to break the cycle and turn the tide for the next generation. In the eyes of their grandkids, they're not the angels, they're the Charlies, the ones pulling the strings, guiding, protecting, and ensuring a different future. If I'd heard the Colonel more clearly back then, when I left for my own safety, I think he would have said, "You think you failed them, but maybe you gave them a glimpse of what safety could look like, of what was possible, and sometimes that's enough." My sisters and I had to work and build our way through all the struggles. We didn't always get it right, but we learned. We survived. And survival, I realized, wasn't just about escaping. It was about finding something worth holding on to. Maybe that's why I was drawn to people who seemed to have more than we did and seemed to have it all figured out. To those who could turn struggle into swagger, pain into presence. I wanted to believe in heroes, and for a while I did, until I learned that not all heroes are what they seem. And that is what we'll learn about in the next chapter. Thank you. I want to see you soar.